Stories come in all shapes and sizes. Some are real, some are unknown, and some are just fiction, designed to keep us entertained on the edge of our seats while we read them. I myself always enjoyed the mystery aspect of them all. The question of, did this actually happen? Or is it just nothing but a simple creepypasta? Welcome to Today, I have a few stories to present you, where it's your task to ask yourself if the locations and these stories occurring on them are real or not. For those that have watched Beyond Belief, fact or fiction, this will be quite similar. With the extra that next to the real and fictional stories, I will also be throwing in myths. Your task is simple. I will give you a few stories to work with. You only have to tell me, which one are Locus, myth, or pure bogus? Write your answers in the comment section below if you so wish. The Man with the Leaf. I used to have a very strange and overall confusing childhood. We lived in Penrith, England, near Edenhall. My parents fought a lot, and it didn't even take them 4 years after I was born to divorce each other. My mother left our home and we've never seen her since. While I began to grow up, my father was nice enough to still keep her in memory and tell me about who she was. He always remained very kind about it and never spoke ill of her in any way. He always was a man with a golden heart, and looking back now, it makes me love my dad even more. My dad isn't a big man or anything, but do anything to his children and he will come after you. How do I know this? Well, because of a few very strange weeks when I was 7 years old. My dad liked to take me to the nearby park once a week. The park had a big playground for kids and it was situated on a big meadow near the edge of a dense forest. A lot of kids spent their days there when the school was over or just during the weekends. It is also the place where I met my childhood friends Alex and Simon. They were the most dauntless type of kids that liked to pull me into trouble alongside them. Running into the nearby woods was something we did a lot because we wanted to explore it. Of course, we were caught a lot before even reaching the forest and reprimanded for it, because kids that age shouldn't be roaming around in such a place, of course. There was one time, however, when we actually managed to enter the forest and finally roam around as we pleased. We decided to play hide and seek, and though we were very young, we understood that we shouldn't get too deep into the forest in order to not get lost. It was a time when phones were not very common, and as such we couldn't just call up someone in case something happened. But it didn't deter us from playing a few rounds. Alex was the third to search and I managed to find quite a good spot inside a big open log in the ground near a footpath leading deeper into the woods. I stayed quiet and heard nothing but the rustling of leaves as well as the distant crinkling of fallen leaves as Alex walked around on them. It must have been around 5 to 10 minutes of hiding when I began to hear something that sounded like distant whistling. I made sure to stay hidden even more since I thought someone from the nearby park came to walk around in the forest too, and I knew if he knew my dad and caught me, I'd be grounded for quite a while. As I stayed hidden, I noticed the silent whistling didn't come any closer or went any further away. I took my chances and peeked around the opening of the log. That's when I saw something on the far end of the footpath. It was a tall man just standing there. Due to the distance, it was difficult to see if he was turned away or towards me. I heard the whistling continue and had already forgotten about the game I was playing. I was fixated on him and also noticed he held something in his left hand. It looked like a big green leaf just flapping around in the wind. It's easy to say that I was quite weirded out by him, and before I knew it, a loud "Ha!" shook me up as Alex loomed over me, laughing that he found me. Simon was alongside him, already being found before. I hadn't even heard Alex finding Simon. That's how fixed I was on the man. I was a little mad that he was being so loud and of course that I had lost. I then crawled out of the log and looked back at the footpath. The man was still standing there. The area became dead silent, as Alex and Simon also noticed the man and stared at him alongside me. Simon then asked us if we could hear it too, and at first I was confused since the man had stopped whistling. By now I was pretty sure he was facing us as well in the same stance during the time I was hidden. It freaked me out, because it meant he also must have stared at me while I was hiding. Suddenly we began to hear a very weird sound. It sounded like someone whispering very loudly, like the sound you'd make when you try to whisper but make it obvious that you're not trying to be silent. I assumed it was the man at first, but it didn't make any sense. Like with the whistling, it sounded like it came from the wind. I told the others we should head back, both because I didn't want to get in trouble, but also because the situation really freaked me out. We quietly but swiftly started walking back when we heard footsteps approaching over rapid crackling leaves. That's when we started running. Running towards the edge, screaming bloody murder as we tried to find help. I heard the steps come closer and closer, and I didn't dare to turn around. I saw the park in the distance, and just before we managed to get out, I felt a hand wrapping itself around my mouth, pulling me towards the ground. I kicked and swung around as best as I could, feeling the air escape my lungs, and I began to see black dots floating around my vision as I slowly began to lose consciousness. The whispering I heard before became louder and louder, and I couldn't believe the type of freak we've stumbled into. The last thing I remember is a deafening silence and a lot of rumbling noise in my ears. The next thing I saw was my dad looking at me, being overjoyed that I'd finally come to. It had been a few minutes only, but in those minutes a lot had happened. My father apparently had seen what was going on, and alongside some other men they had ran over to us and had knocked the man off of me. Two of them immediately took us back, while the other two ran after the man who had managed to get back up. Apparently, however, they couldn't catch the man due to his extreme speed. He also didn't look like the typical homeless person or any other type of typical criminal, since he wore decent clothing. It was a simple blocky red and white flannel, black shirt and blue jeans. Nothing to even cover his face, which in contrast had long black hair covering most of his facial features. We called the police and they arrived within minutes. A large-scale search was conducted in the woods with multiple groups with canine units and even a helicopter. We went home, and while my father was happy I was alive, he was equally as furious with me. I got grounded for 2 weeks and was forbidden to ever even leave the playground out of the park if we ever went there. But it's safe to say that I didn't feel comfortable ever even going close there anymore. It must have been about 5 days later, with still no word from the police, when I heard a knock at the front door, and my dad had asked me to go see who it is. I looked through the glass panel and saw nobody. That's when I decided to open the door a crack. Considering we had a chain lock protecting the door from fully opening due to my dad not really trusting me that I would not just leave the house to go somewhere, there was no immediate danger that someone could just break in. My heart sank as I saw a single leaf put down on our doorstep. It was placed there in such a manner that someone really had to put in the effort in order to not make it fly away in the wind. It looked very similar to the one the man was holding, and I was pretty sure it could have been the exact same one. I shouted for my dad and told him about the whole ordeal, thinking it was a way of threatening us that man knew where we lived. We contacted the police yet again. They said they thought it was just a freak thing and that there was a high chance that it was just coincidental or a poor prank of one of my friends. They did promise, however, to remain in the area should anything happen. Ever since then, I've never seen that man again, and no more leaves were quote-unquote coincidentally placed on our front doorstep. But I could swear, I still heard the whispering and whistling in the wind from time to time. It caused me paranoia for a long time. I'm 29 now, and I'm glad to say I've been doing a lot better through the years. But it still is, and probably always will be, a haunting memory. That weird, eerie feeling. It was the middle of the night when I woke up from my bed thirsty and with a dry throat. Like with the memes you see on your phone, I knew it was time for that special moment of drinking water at 3 AM. Though I don't exactly remember the time it was. All I know is that it was winter, the nights were long, and I woke up at the time when the sun would not be up for at least the next 5 to 6 hours. My house was a 2-story building, and as such I went downstairs to a dark living room and kitchen. Since I was just going to be down there for a short while, I turned on the light of the basement, since it's not a big one, and I don't need that much light to drink some water. Of course, the refreshment didn't disappoint, and when I finished, I noticed that I felt a little bit uneasy. We aren't in a dangerous neighborhood and also in a very urbanized part of town with lights on outside almost everywhere, so I generally don't have anything to feel uneasy about. I decided to take a leak before heading back to my nest and went under the impression that I merely must have still been a bit tired, hence why I was still a little bit irritable. I kept the light in the hallway on so I could just turn off the basement light and go towards the staircase. As I switched off the basement light, however, the eerie and uneasy feeling became stronger. And with every step I took towards the hallway door, that feeling became even more present. By now I was feeling very on edge, and eventually, even though I was 19 at the time, I sprinted towards the hallway door and shut it quickly. It's also worth noting that our hallway door has a simple sliding lock on it that we almost never close because there simply is no reason to. In this case, however, out of pure reflex, I immediately closed and locked the door. I took a deep breath, not knowing why I felt this way, and I started walking up the stairs when I suddenly heard a quiet... I looked back at the door for a while before the feeling returned and urged me to run up the stairs and jump in my bed. I thought I'd lost all sense of reality and tried to make sense of what I'd just heard. The only possibility that made sense to me was that due to the strength of this weird feeling, my brain must have started hallucinating and made up that weird sound. Or perhaps because the house I lived in was quite old, the door must have creaked at a very inconvenient time. I still remember that weird occurrence to this day, and nothing like it has ever happened again. Nowadays, I'm someone who likes to think that paranormal activity can happen. But I will have to stay by my conclusion, that I think my brain was simply hallucinating due to my sleepiness and the fact that I didn't feel quite right that evening. It has ever since become a neat little horror story that I tell my friends and that we like to speculate on, even though we all think the same about it. The Lady at Night. My friends and I always wanted to take a trip to Bavaria in Germany. We come from a big city and just wanted to be away from all that for a short while. We knew that Bavaria was one of those states where nature was still the main ruler. Small villages and furthermore meadows and hills as far as the eye could see. We flew to Munich and decided to make our way up to the city of Regensburg and back down, doing stops here and there wherever we liked. We had a really fun time and Regensburg was exactly what we were looking for. We booked a hotel for the night in Pentling and knew that we would begin the second half of our journey tomorrow. We made the most of our night and actually went to a few clubs that the city had to offer. It must have been around 1 AM when we decided to get back to our hotel and call it a night. Luckily, we didn't have to check out too early in the morning, so the fact that some of us were quite wasted wouldn't become an issue. Since Pentling was a bit further away, we took a taxi back to Pentling and decided to walk the rest back in order to see some more of the neighboring city. We walked around the streets of Pentling, admiring the architecture of the city, when we also came across a chapel that we admired for a while. In our drunken state, everything was amazing to us after all. It was around that time when we all heard a lady sobbing away near the entrance of the chapel and we began looking at each other, quite uncomfortably since we didn't really want to get involved but also didn't know what was going on. Simone, probably the most wasted out of all of us and the one who was always the most empathetic when she was fully drunk, wanted to console the lady. That's when I pulled her back and whispered that we should probably just leave her be for now. It was only then that another friend of mine called Stanley told us that she was suddenly gone. Now we were a little freaked out. That lady was gone in less than a few seconds, and we either were so drunk that we didn't notice, or the woman simply wasn't in her right mind, and she just toyed with us and then straight up ran around the corner. We didn't feel right about the whole situation, especially because there was no one else around on the street, so we immediately and somewhat quickly began to distance ourselves from this location and went back to the hotel as quick as we could. By then, I can't even remember falling into bed. All I know is that I woke up on a completely messed up bed and probably tossed and turned around like an idiot all night. Most of us had quite the hangover, and around noon we finally met up in the lunchroom of the hotel, where we reminisced about last night and of course that lady that we saw. We laughed and simply thought that we were probably too wasted to even notice the woman leaving. I didn't particularly feel good about it, but then again, what should I have done in my drunken state? Afterwards, we simply packed our stuff and went our way back to Munich with stops in between. I would be lying, however, if I said that the image of that crying woman in front of that chapel and her sudden disappearance didn't bother me for multiple days. And those were the 3 stories, all with different strange and or possibly paranormal occurrences within them. But what do you think? Which story could you identify as the true one, the Locus? Which one could have been a myth? Or were they all 3 just pure bogus? Story 1. Was true bogus. The Man with the Leaf is a fictional short story written by myself. Story 2 is pure Locus. Yes. This story is in fact true, as it happened to myself. I can safely say that to this day I can still not truly explain what happened that night, other than my brain just playing tricks on me. But regardless, that 3 AM water was truly refreshing indeed. Story 3 was a true myth. The third story is based on a myth from the German city Regensburg and is referred to as the Clock Muada from Pentling. It tells the tale of a lady roaming around a chapel in Pentling, always sobbing and, according to some bystanders, with a horrendous appearance. Some also claim that she is capable of predicting future accidents. It's been said that around the 70s, the skeleton of an old lady was found in front of the chapel following a supposed crime, and people are linking this supposed apparition to the skeleton that was found. And with that, thank you all for watching.